Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a deep dive into how the recent Ukrainian strike has pushed Crimea into an increasingly isolated position, and how this moment is reshaping the battlefield in ways that could impact the broader direction of the war. This script will walk through the events, the strategy behind them, the consequences for both sides, and the emerging reality that Crimea is no longer the safe logistical hub Russia once relied on. The paragraphs will be short, the tone will be clear, and the perspective will stay focused on giving you a complete understanding of what this shift means without adding headings or labels. Let's get started. Crimea has always been more than territory. For Russia, it has been a symbol of power, a military anchor, and a geographic advantage that supports operations across southern Ukraine. For Ukraine, it has been a constant reminder of loss and a critical strategic location that must eventually be returned. Because of this, every major event involving Crimea tends to ripple across military, political, and psychological spheres. In recent weeks, Ukraine launched another significant strike on Russian infrastructure inside Crimea. Though not the first and certainly not the last, this operation has become a turning point because of how it directly targeted Russia's ability to move supplies, fuel, equipment, and reinforcements across the peninsula. The attack disrupted one of the main logistical arteries that Russia relies on, and that disruption has begun to show on the battlefield. Ukraine's approach here wasn't improvisation. It was part of a larger strategy aimed at stretching Russia's logistics thin, reducing its operational flexibility, and forcing Russian commanders to redistribute resources away from front line fighting. By attacking the systems that sustain Russia's presence in Crimea, Ukraine is attempting to weaken the entire network rather than individual pieces. The strike also highlighted something important: Ukraine's growing long-range capability. Over time, Ukrainian forces have developed or acquired more precise, more reliable, and more survivable weapons. These tools let them reach deeper into occupied territory, disrupting places the Russian military once assumed were safely out of reach. One of the most notable effects of the strike has been the growing sense of vulnerability inside Crimea. The peninsula, long considered heavily fortified, is no longer functioning as a safe rear area. Russian troops stationed there now face more uncertainty, more pressure, and more frequent disruptions to the infrastructure they depend on. As supply routes slow down or get rerouted, every aspect of Russia's presence in Crimea becomes more complicated. Fuel takes longer to reach depots. Ammunition must be moved at night or through less efficient paths. Reinforcements arrive with delays, and damaged equipment stacks up because repair facilities become overwhelmed. All these issues combine to create a logistical strain that affects Russia's ability to sustain operations beyond Crimea. Another major consequence is that Russia now has to devote more of its combat resources to defense rather than offense. Every time Ukraine strikes deeper into the peninsula, Russian planners must reconsider how to protect key roads, bridges, ports, and command posts. This forces Russia to pull forces from other regions, weakening their position in active combat zones. Ukraine, meanwhile, has taken advantage of these shifts by applying a strategy of attrition. Rather than rushing into a single large-scale offensive, they focus on methodical strikes that gradually dismantle the systems that keep Russia's war machine functioning. By doing this, Ukraine reshapes the conditions of the battlefield over time rather than relying solely on high-risk rapid breakthroughs. Another key aspect of the strike's impact is psychological. Crimea has been heavily militarized and deeply integrated into Russian political messaging. Moscow has repeatedly portrayed the peninsula as fully secure and permanently under Russian control. Each successful Ukrainian strike undermines that message and introduces doubt for both soldiers and civilians within Russian-held territory. For Ukrainian citizens, these operations serve as a powerful signal of capability and determination. They reinforce a narrative of resistance and remind the world that Ukraine is actively contesting the occupation of Crimea. For Russian citizens, however, the strikes challenge the perception that the war is distant and contained. Crimea was supposed to symbolize stability and strength, and now it has become a symbol of vulnerability. The military impact also extends beyond morale. Command structures inside Crimea have been repeatedly disrupted by Ukrainian strikes. Every time a command post, radar station, or communications hub is hit, the Russian military has to adjust its local leadership structure, relocate staff, or re-establish lines of communication. Even temporary disruptions can create operational delays that weaken Russian efficiency on the ground. Another important factor is how these strikes influence the broader international support landscape. Ukraine's ability to execute precise, high-value strikes strengthens its case for continued military aid. The more Ukraine demonstrates competence and strategic planning, the more confidence its allies have in the effectiveness of advanced weapon systems. There is also a diplomatic dimension to consider. The more vulnerable Crimea becomes, the further it shifts from being a bargaining chip of Russian strength to a liability Russia must constantly defend. This changes how potential negotiations might unfold in the future and creates new pressure points in global political discussions surrounding the war. As Crimea becomes more isolated, the Russian military faces a growing dilemma. It must either commit more resources to defend the peninsula or risk losing its ability to use Crimea as a strategic base. Both choices come with heavy costs. Reinforcing Crimea stretches already limited resources, but neglecting Crimea risks allowing Ukraine to degrade Russia's position to the point where holding the peninsula becomes unsustainable. Ukraine, on the other hand, benefits from the initiative. By choosing the time, place, and nature of each strike, Ukraine forces Russia into a reactive position. This shift in momentum is crucial because wars are often decided not only by brute force, but by control over the pace and direction of events. The more Crimea becomes isolated, the more it becomes clear that Russia's grip on the peninsula is not as firm as it once appeared. Supply lines now require more protection. Fuel depots must be hidden. Troop movements need to be dispersed. These changes slow down the operational tempo and introduce inefficiencies that accumulate over time. Another consequence is the impact on the Black Sea Fleet. With Crimea increasingly under threat, naval operations become more restricted. Ships must move more cautiously. Ports require additional protection. Maintenance becomes more complicated. The fleet's ability to project power diminishes as the surrounding infrastructure loses reliability. Ukraine's approach also signals something broader about the war. The focus is shifting from territorial gains to strategic weakening. Instead of risking heavy losses in direct assaults, Ukraine is working to dismantle Russia's ability to sustain its forces. This shift in strategy is both pragmatic and effective given the resources available. As the strike's effects ripple into the operational environment, Russia confronts the reality that defending Crimea is more expensive and more complex than previously expected. What was once an asset is slowly becoming a strategic burden. Every damaged supply line, every disrupted command center, and every disabled piece of infrastructure forces the Russian military to invest more energy into simply maintaining basic functionality. For Ukraine, this moment represents a turning point. It demonstrates that long-range precision, strategic planning, and focused pressure can reshape the battlefield even without full control of the territory. It also reinforces the idea that Crimea's fate will play a major role in determining the outcome of the war itself. The recent strike has also increased uncertainty among pro-Russian administrators in Crimea. As infrastructure becomes less reliable, civilian life becomes more complicated. Fuel shortages, transport delays, and communication disruptions all contribute to growing frustration. When occupation authorities struggle to maintain basic services, public confidence erodes. Meanwhile, Ukrainian intelligence operations inside Crimea continue to disrupt Russian control. The strike amplifies the effects of sabotage, infiltration, and local resistance. Each piece of pressure compounds the next, steadily reducing Russia's ability to maintain control without significant reinforcements. This dynamic also puts Russian logistics planners under immense pressure. They must now find alternate routes, establish new depots, and rely more heavily on vulnerable supply convoys. Every workaround introduces new weaknesses that Ukraine can target in future strikes. As Crimea becomes more isolated, Russian military units operating in southern Ukraine face direct consequences. They may experience delays in receiving vital equipment, slower medical evacuations, and uneven fuel distribution. These strains affect overall combat effectiveness and reduce Russia's ability to sustain high-intensity operations. Ukraine's strike also serves as a test case for future operations. By analyzing the results, Ukrainian planners can refine their methods, gather intelligence, and identify the most vulnerable points in Russia's logistical system. This adaptation creates a cycle of improvement that increases the effectiveness of each subsequent strike. Another factor is international perception. The more Ukraine demonstrates its ability to isolate Crimea, the more the global narrative shifts toward acknowledging that Crimea is not permanently secured under Russian control. This shift in perception influences diplomatic discussions, economic sanctions, and long-term strategic planning among Ukraine's partners. Russia, meanwhile, must adapt by fortifying Crimea further, shifting more air defenses and reinforcing supply routes. Each reinforcement, however, comes at the cost of weakening another part of the front. Ukraine's strategy deliberately forces these trade-offs, weakening Russia's broader operational cohesion. As all these consequences take shape, one truth becomes increasingly clear. Crimea is no longer functioning as Russia's untouchable stronghold. The geography that once benefited Russia is now working against it. Long supply lines have become vulnerabilities. Dense military infrastructure has become a target-rich environment. Civilian dependence on fragile systems creates added pressure. The battlefield is changing, and the recent Ukrainian strike has accelerated that change dramatically. What once seemed static is now fluid. What once seemed secure is now at risk. The isolation of Crimea is not a sudden collapse, but a steady tightening of pressure that weakens Russia's ability to operate with confidence. Ukraine's strategy of degrading logistics, disrupting command structures, and undermining morale is reshaping how the war is fought. Crimea, once a cornerstone of Russia's military position, is now becoming a strategic liability that drains resources, attention, and manpower. As Ukraine continues applying pressure and Russia struggles to adapt, the war enters a new phase. This phase is defined not by rapid territorial changes, but by the slow erosion of Russia's capacity to sustain its forces. The strike on Crimea is a major step in that direction, and its impact will continue to unfold in the coming months. Thank you for watching and staying with us through this analysis. If you enjoyed this script, feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth discussions about the evolving situation and what it means for the future.